Hey guys, and welcome to another video. This video is the long-awaited motion control guide for Season 7. The reason I want to talk more about motion control sensitivity is because since a lot of people in the comments, it seems like, is starting to use motion and don't know how to get started regarding what sensitivity to use or whether they should use their right stick and what sensitivity they should use for that. If you're one of those people, this video is for you. Before we get started, keep in mind that I'm the only person to ever consistently upload these type of videos for Fortnite. So if you enjoyed these type of video or helped you in some way, please subscribe. In fact, only a small percentage of people is subscribed to me, so if you can click the subscribe button below, that would help me a ton. Now, let's get into this video. So, the first thing we're going to be talking about is how motion control works in Fortnite. So, the thing about Fortnite's motion controls on the Switch is that it's very responsive. So what I mean by that, let me just show you. And there should be a hand cam somewhere on your screen, so you can see my hands moving and you can see I'm moving the controller. So I play on 20, which is a pretty low sense, I would say. But let me just raise this up, just for the sake of this example, to 100%, which is the maximum. And what I mean by responsive is that if I just move it a tiny bit, you see on the hand cam that I'm barely moving it. You see it's registering those big movements, because what I'm trying to say here is that if you want to go these high sense, you're going to have to keep in mind that it's going to be very responsive, so it's going to register those shaky movements when you're holding it, rather when you have like a lower sense. So let me just go to my other sense to 20%. When I shake it, it doesn't make a big difference on it. It's still kind of shaky, but then when I hold it still, it's not going to register every small movement. It practically like stays still. So that's something you have to keep in mind with that. And I talked about it a little bit just earlier about low versus high sense. So I get asked this a lot. So whether you should use low or high sense, and I say that really depends on two things. What you preference, because sensitivity is preference. I typically throw my hands around so I can have good aim. So I play on a low sense, but I throw my hands around to build and edit and all that. But if you prefer to have full control of it but use like less movement, I would suggest you to use a higher sense to build. And I have played on low and high sense before, but I just like low better. And the second thing that whether you should use low or high sense is what you're playing on. So the thing with Switch is that many different players play on a lot of different things. So they play on a Pro controller, which is the one I'm using, and that it just all comes down to preference, because you have full control like a controller, so you can play on low or high sense. But using like something like when you're like playing handheld, so like you're playing handheld like this, for example, since you have your screen there and you want your screen to be moving, I would suggest that you play on a higher sense if you want to play motion control on a handheld. And if you just want to play Joy-Cons, like the grip, I don't have the grip, but if you just play Joy-Cons with this, since it's basically like the Pro controller, I would suggest that you play whatever, like I said with the Pro controller. The thing is, this one is pretty light, so that's something to keep in mind, while the Pro controller is a lot heavier. And another thing is, is this one, the motion axis. So there's two options, so yaw versus roll. So I personally use yaw, and what yaw does is that it takes horizontal movement and outputs them as a left and right output. So if I turn left horizontally, it'll turn left. If I turn right, it'll turn right. But with roll is a lot different. So it's meant to be played like this. So if you turn this thing, and it's kind of weird. So if you turn this, I guess to the, how should I guess here is turning left. From my perspective, turning left, it turns right. But if I turn it right, it turns left. So it's kind of weird, I say, and I don't personally like it. You could use like, you know, the invert view thing, the invert like turn, I guess. So like when you turn that way, it'll turn the way you want it to go. I personally think that's kind of weird and not typically how people should play it. But if you like it, then hey, who's stopping you? So just play like that. So I would definitely use yaw, but then if you're on like, handheld, and one of the people on the comments told me that they play roll while using like handheld or whatever, because since you're playing the screen like this, you want to like roll like this rather than doing horizontal movement where it's like shaky. You can at least still see your screen like that. So props to that person. I'll just put the comment on the screen if I could find it. But yeah, that's what someone told me about that. Now, how to find your perfect sensitivity. So there's a lot of things to take into account. So one thing is the space that you have. So if you have less space, use a higher sense, since you don't have that much space and you still want to have full control of it. If you have a lot of space like I do, you can go for a lot lower sense. And another thing you have to take into account is the controller. And like I said before, like if you're using like the Joy-Cons or like the Pro controller, it all comes down to preference. But if you use like handheld, it would be better to use high sense, since you're not shaking the screen a lot, so it'd be easier to see what's going on when using motion. And another thing to take into account is the preference between arm or wrist gameplay. What I mean by that is, if you played keyboard and mouse before, if you happen to, you usually let's take this mouse for example. So usually, let me just move this real quick. So usually you will have your mouse and you would use to move your mouse either by using only your wrist or your arm to move around. So motion control is kind of like that. So if you use a low sense, you particularly use your arm more for those bigger movements. If you want those smaller movements, then use high sense and use your wrist a lot more. So if I go to 100% like I have done before, and I just use my wrist, I only have to use my wrist to move. I don't need to use my arms that much. I play on low sense. I would use my arm to like crank, but sometimes use my wrist for like those smaller movements. So you can use like combination. And another thing to take into account is whether you want to implement your right stick sensitivity into your gameplay. So a person who uses motion plus stick is a YouTuber called Tetra. So Tetra uses, what I have seen from his video is that he uses, you know, the stick to move around, but he uses the motion to edit. So it'll look something like, you know, like this. And it looks like he's on like high sense, but then he plays on a low sense, like 18%. I think I just from his settings. So if you want to do something like that, then it would be better if you can use like, I don't know, low sense plus the stick, because since you can use the stick to move around, there's no point of using high sense when you're doing that. So you can use the motion to like aim, while you use the stick, you know, for builds, to look around better. And you can also use the motion method. But if you don't want to play like mid-high sense, I say, then no one's stopping you. You can always use that. But I think it's better to use low plus the right stick. If you want to take away anything from this video, is do whatever works for you, which is what you prefer, because at the end of the day, sensitivity all comes down to preference, whether you like high sense or low sense, whether you play on a pro controller or you like to play on Joy-Cons or whatever, you want to play on handheld, whatever works for you, go for it. No one's stopping you. So let's go on to find your sensitivity. So you want to go through this process. So if you're starting out, let's just like reset to the default for this. So default would be this, and obviously you want to have motion on, whether you want to have yaw or roll. I'll just put yaw for the sake of this, and it'll start you off with 20. So we're gonna focus on your motion sensitivity not targeting and your motion sensitivity harvesting tool. We're gonna focus on that. So particularly, it would be better if you keep those two sensitivities the same, since that is basically how it works with like regular stick control. But with motion, you have a separate motion for harvesting tool and a separate one for just your regular not targeting sensitivity. So I'll keep that same, and I'll put both. I will change the not targeting to the same as the harvesting tool, so like 50%. I'll start with there and then crank around a bit and see if it feels good. So like practicing your aim, your build, and all that. I'll link some maps in the description for you to like try to like test your sensitivity out. And I forgot to mention this, so if you want to play on a higher harvesting tool, that's fine, but it would be better if you keep those two sensitivities the same. I forgot to say about that. Anyway, lower, if you think your sensitivity is a little too high, lower your sensitivity by 10. So I think 50 is good, but I feel it's a little too high for my likings. I'll lower it to 40. But if you played on 50 but you think it's too low, then raise it to like 60 or something, and then try that out. Once you get found that, now you should go on to your ADS and scope sensitivity. And for this one, I personally like it for it to be the same, and also your targeting and your scope sense should be typically lower than your look and your pickaxe sensitivity. So if I play on 20, I would prefer it to be like lower than 20%. Start at the same sensitivity as your look sensitivity, and I think you should just go to like scatter and use the horizontal thing and see if that works. Do some aim training on it. So let me just load that. Okay, now we're in the map, so you would take the SCAR or like any AR you want and take a sniper or a pistol, so maybe like a deagle, and just get the sniper, the bolt action, and go into either horizontal, dynamic, or vertical. Start with horizontal actually. Go into third person, 75 gameplay, and just test it out. So I think it's too high, so I would lower it down. But if you think that it's too low and you want like a higher ADS sense than your look, you can always raise it by like 10 or 5 if you're approaching to your perfect sense. But for me, I would just lower it. In my case, I would just lower it by 10 for both. I forgot to put this into the video, so I had to go back and record this, but I forgot to talk about controller sensitivity settings. So let me just go over that real quick. So if you were to use motion control with your right stick, you're gonna have to decide whether you want low or high sensitivity for this one. So we'll just look at the look sensitivity here. So it depends on what you want to use your right stick for. So if you want to use it for like flick shots or like just to look around better, I would suggest to have like a high look sense and most likely play on linear, so there's no like, it wouldn't exponentially get faster, it would have the raw input of that. But if you were to use the right stick with your motion and equally in your gameplay, then I would suggest either linear or exponential is fine, but I feel like exponential would be better for aiming. But then if you want to use your right stick for more builds, then use linear, which I do use it for. And for your ADS, I would suggest to have like a low sensitivity if you're on linear, but if you're on expo, I suggest to have a high one. Because the thing with motion, when you combine it with stick, there's so many combinations you can do, because you could be a stick player, you can do everything with the stick, but you probably want to use motion for AR aiming, you can do that. If you want to use motion for everything, but you want to use the stick for like extra camera movement, you can do that also. And if you want to use motion for aiming, but you want to use your stick for building and editing, you can also do that, because it doesn't have to be always motion or always stick. You can use like a combination for motion to do different parts of your gameplay and your stick to do different parts of your gameplay also. So that's why I actually do recommend at least implementing motion into your gameplay. It doesn't have to be like you have to use it in every part of your gameplay. Like you have to use it for aiming, for building, for editing. It would be great if you can implement in all, but if you're more comfortable just playing stick but then using motion for a different part that could enhance your gameplay, you can do that. That's just the great thing about motion. So if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, comment, turn on post notification, all of that. And when you're commenting, tell me if this video helped or not, and with some suggestion to make more of these videos better. Thanks for watching the video, and have a great rest of your day or night.